Let's start out with our favorite guy, Elliot Abrams, who
Yep.
is a Trump guy. He was part of the Trump administration,
Well,
but
he's a
this just
Reagan
goes
guy,
to show
fam.
you but yeah, but it
He's a
just that's
Reagan guy.
exactly it.
Yeah.
So okay, exactly. It just goes to show you that it doesn't matter
Yeah.
who becomes president, and this is why again I'm really not that excited about the U.S. election because this is really like not changing anything. The foreign policy doesn't change, so that's
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But why
I
don't you
think a
take
lot
us
of
into that?
people, they don't know who Elliot Abrams is. I was talking about him yesterday at the parade, and a lot of people didn't. Some people did, but a lot of people didn't. There was a few of us like, can you believe this guy? He's like a blood-sucking vampire that just won't fucking go away. Elliot Abrams, who was once eventually charged for lying about the Iran-Contra scandal. Let's bring up the antiwar.com article over here, Cheese Slice, and we'll get rolling on this. Dave DeCamp, he does some amazing work, So it says Biden nominates Elliot Abrams to Public Diplomacy Commission. Abrams led the Trump administration's failed regime change effort in Venezuela. Remember, he tried to whack him with a drone and covered up atrocities in Latin America in the 1980s. That was with the Iran-Contra scandal. President Biden announced Monday that he will nominate Elliot Abrams to the bipartisan United States Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy, fam. CNN has reported Abrams is a neoconservative hawk who led the Trump's administration's failed regime change effort, which involved crushing economic sanctions that are still in effect today, besides Biden giving Chevron a limited license to pump oil in the country. Toward the end of Trump's presidency, Abrams was also assigned as the U.S. top Iran envoy, where he oversaw a sanctions policy designed to prevent President Biden from re-entering the nuclear Iran deal. Fam, do you got anything to say about that just off the jump right there so far? I mean, because that shit is laughable right off the bat.
Yeah, so Abrams is not loved by any anti-imperialist. I know any of our friends that have been to Latin America because he was responsible for the attempt to coup Venezuela, and of course that failed. But I mean, this is a guy that is just a hawk. He's one of the worst, most proliferous hawks there is, and he like as Pasta mentioned earlier, he's from the Reagan era, but again, this is talking about the U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. foreign policy will remain whether it's Biden or Trump. People like Abrams get to stay in power, and so this just goes to show you how the apparatus here works. People like Abrams, the State Department, the intelligence apparatus, they get to continue doing what they've always done. In fact, they get raises and they get higher positions as time goes by. And it also shows you that in spite of everything that's happening right now, the shift that is happening around the world, that is extremely visible from this side of the world towards a multipolar, cooperative foreign policy among many countries. Countries that seek to have that with the United States, not just with each other, but with the United States. The United States is not wanting to go along with that. So that this is also a clear sign of that on the more macro level.
I think it's easy. You can even say right now that we found maybe a area in which Biden's better than Trump. It's Latin America. Every single time you just start looking under the hood, and as you put in the doc today, we'll show you how Trump doubled down on the bullshit. Like saying these things that are just openly where he's manufacturing consent. If he ain't a wolf in sheep's clothing, I don't know what is. But I am so against Trump and his policies in Latin America. His last week of his candidacy, his presidency, excuse me, he slapped Cuba with extra hard sanctions, labeled them a state sponsor of terrorism, which is just ridiculous to do that in Cuba. I think there's like 2 knifings a year there, fam, on average. It's a different culture. You know this. We walk through the streets of Havana. They might be going through some hard times, but the people themselves are just amazing and loving. And I never felt threatened or in danger at any time. So for them to label that's ridiculous. And we'll kind of go into it a little bit. Let me just read the rest of this. Abrams is notorious for his role in covering up the atrocities committed by the U.S.-backed forces in Latin America during the Reagan administration and in the 1980s, most notably the El Mozote massacre in El Salvador, which we know about these death squads. Over 800 civilians were killed by U.S. trained forces. And at the the time, Abrams praised the death squad and disputed the death toll. In 1991, Abrams pled guilty to lying to Congress about the Iran-Contra affair, but was pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. Of course he was. Abrams also served in George W. Bush's administration as a Deputy National Security Advisor from 2005 to 2009. He currently works for the Council on Foreign Relationships as a senior fellow for the Middle Eastern Studies. You can take that one down, cheese slice. I had enough. I don't want to read anymore. It's just nauseating that they allow these people to get anywhere close to these positions. And it doesn't make a difference. They can commit crimes. They can be in trouble. They'll just get pardoned and continue to do.
They don't allow them, Pasta. They place them specifically.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Credit where credit's due, fam. At one point, we thought the squad was pretty decent. One time, we even said that Ilhan Omar might have been in the lead in the running for the best squad member at one point. You know, going after APEC with the bling bling. She also did this. Check this out. This is Ilhan Omar back in the days when the Trump administration was appointing, nominating Elliot Abrams.
Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question.
That
was not a question. That was I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S. trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no, would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interests, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether you, under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question. Because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had
Yeah.
for you is that does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Fam, I don't know. After hearing it right now, I don't think it was as good as when we first watched that a while ago. I mean, there's different ways. I
Yes.
think she could have got in there in pride and said a few things. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, she still does the whole, there's no doubt that the American foreign policy is to help the people of Venezuela find their democracy, because Venezuela is not a democracy according to the United States, which is such a great democracy. I mean, she still goes back on that. And that is what the role of people like Ilhan Omar and the squad is to provide a pseudo alternative to the neoliberal contingent that isn't really that much of an alternative. It is just essentially better sounding, but leaves the open door foreign policy that is still the Monroe Doctrine led. It's still the same type of policy, but they do get off at going after Republicans, which is why this happened during the Trump administration, rather than you'll see it happen very much during the Biden administration when there's a Democrat. So they do these things to sort of, rally the progressives in the Democratic Party, or the people that believe that there
Is she frozen? All right, she's going to have to come out and come back in probably. So just put up Kennedy's tweet really quick, because we haven't heard much from the squad this time, but you can see Kennedy's out there, and he's got this out here. Can you see so we can show his name real quick? Slide it down a little bit. Thank you. President Biden has appointed disgraced neocon Elliot Abrams to his diplomacy commission, infamous for his support of El Salvador's death squads in the 1980s. Abrams was convicted in 1989 of lying to Congress about his criminal role in the Iran-Iraq affair. This is something to pay attention to. When the Libertarian Party candidate comes in, and we know that Cornel West is good in foreign policy, but whose head is there more? Who can actually, push the agenda to make some leeway and some headway, I should say, with some of the countries in Latin America? Like, that would be a good question to all three candidates, whether it be Cornel West, whether it be RFK, whether it be the Libertarian candidate. Where do you see an area and opportunity to build some bridges with a country in Latin America and hear what they have to say? But being understanding and being on top of it is very important. Look what it says in the Common Dreams article. Totally indefensible. Biden nominates death squad backer Elliot Abrams to the diplomacy panel. Excuse me. Elliot Abrams, enemy of human rights, apologist for mass murder, should have no place within spitting distance of any Democratic administration in any capacity. So I wanted to bring that up. I thought that was pretty cool. Part of the Common Dreams article. Now we have the Trump on Venezuela, right? So, a lot of people say that he's the biggest peace candidate out there. It's just ridiculous. And they always said he was one of the most peaceful presidents. He didn't start any new wars. He didn't end any. And he sure as hell fucking made a lot of people in Latin America suffer. And like I said, this is the one area maybe where Joe Biden was better than Donald Trump was Latin America. I'm starting to see a lot of examples of that. Not that say that Biden was any good to end anything. He might have eased some of the pain when it came to Cuba, now in Venezuela. But look what Biden says about, as if it's America's decision and we're allowed to sweat these people out. And people just go along with this. This was what I was talking about the anti-communist, anti-socialist kind of rhetoric. That's what it leads to. It leads to manufacturing of consent for rhetoric like this. Donald J. Trump.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's the worst you can get. Tar. It's like tar. And to refine it, you need special plants. And these people, how about we're buying oil from Venezuela?
Cheese Slice, can you put the volume all the way up on that? Play it again now from the beginning with Pam
was
here.
Ready to collapse. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's horrible. The worst you can get. Tar. It's like tar. And to refine it, you need special plants. And these people, how about we're buying?
Fam, it's just so casually. How about this? We would have taken an oil. We would have had that oil. Would have been ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I was saying before was this is why. So Trump exists essentially because you have people like the Squad that pretty much just are useless. And these reformist ideas don't literally ever work out because you're still in the same system. And, Lenin talked about this many times before. Now, when we talk about Donald Trump presents this idea that there is this populist movement in the country, which I think there is, but he still centers it around the same type of foreign policy that we have the authority to take over anybody's natural resources, that it's America first, but it's an America first also outside of the domestic scene, meaning like in order to succeed, we have to take from other countries in disrespect their national sovereignty in this way, which is not it's not a good business mentality, number one, because you really achieve a lot more through cooperation. And we've seen China achieve relations in Africa, relations in Latin America, and BRICS is continuing to expand precisely because people are more interested in an economic cooperation that benefits multiple people instead of a unilateral type of situation that we've seen in the last, 50, 60, 70 years via the United States and the West. So when he talks about taking Venezuela's oil nonchalantly to his crowd, he's specifically talking to people who are fearful of any sort of outside influence and who only blame immigrants, who only blame everybody else, but don't really understand how we got there, how we have a massive influx of immigrants. This is the same thing that's happening in France, where you have people blaming a bunch of these African migrants, which there are certain elements that are coming in specifically, but that's also being done with a certain agenda by certain people. But the vast majority of people it's been reported, having a lot of these attacking and doing all these sorts of things are actually French. The French have been protesting forever because of neoliberal austerity policies. Where they're like really facing massive inflation, just a decline in life in general. And so instead of really looking at the imperialist policies of France, the imperialist policies of the United States, they blame immigrants. So Trump is really smart in terms of he knows who his audience is and who he's speaking to. And he knows that it's going to sound really good to people who really want to just focus on everybody else being the problem and, just Americans just being victims to these crazy immigrants, that everything will be resolved in that way. And I'm not saying this in terms of, really getting into that back and forth. I'm saying this is a reality here. The foreign policy is really what we have to stop in order for people to really stay in their countries, which is exactly what they would do is if we weren't interfering. And none of that gets talked about on the right on purpose, because it would actually present a solution and it would present a contradiction to what the purpose of the Republican Party is. It's not really to oppose the Democratic Party. It's just to continue the back and forth with zero change in foreign policy.
Yep. I think you have a tweet up there. Cheese Slice, let's bring that up there. Fan made a tweet. a a tweet, and then I also added in him talking about not letting communists into this country as well. I don't think we've gone over that. So
So
go ahead.
I've already said this, right? Like the U.S. boasts about democracy, but really, they're talking about we're talking about massive inflation. I was just in the U.S. It's so expensive, even in Florida. Florida has gotten ridiculously expensive. People have moved there from New York and California, making the housing market go up. And of course, you have these agencies, these gigantic corporations that are buying up all the property. You have a massive inflation, stagnant wages, all of these things. And that's not due to immigration. That's due to the lack of attention being paid to domestic policies. We're not producing anything. We're literally importing everything we have. And the dollar is facing a crisis because everybody else wants to trade in their own currencies. And BRICS just announced that they're also going to create a new currency for BRICS. And all of these people are so interested in doing that because it benefits their own national currency. So what we're seeing here is a mixture of things coming in and affecting the United States. But clearly it doesn't matter because whoever becomes president is going to have to follow the same type of foreign policy because that is the agenda. The national security state apparatus and the State Department and these clandestine agencies are really the ones running things. And if you don't know that by now, just take a look at how our foreign policy has barely shifted in the last 5-6 presidents.
Yeah. Let's play that video of Donald Trump. Another reason not to vote for Donald Trump. He's just ridiculous. He's God-fearing. No, it's the next one on the dock. Cheese slice. These God-fearing communists, these God-hating communists, and these God-hating socialists. What are we gonna do with them, fam? So we got the next one coming up. I just put it in the dock. You got a cheese slice? There you go. Take a look at this. Get the volume up. I don't know if you've seen this yet, fam. This is pretty funny.
Made them competitive. Today, I'm announcing a new plan to protect the integrity
Volume
of
up.
the immigration system. Federal law prohibits the entry of communists and totalitarians into the United States. But my question is, what do we do with the ones that are already here that grew up in it? I think we have to pass a new law for them. Using federal law in Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, I will order my government to deny entry to all communists and all Marxists. Those who come to and join our country must love our country. We want them to love our country. We don't want them when they want to destroy our country. Welcome to America. We want to destroy your country. Thank you very much. So we're going to keep foreign Christian-hating communists, Marxists, and socialists out of America. We're keeping them out of America.
I have good news for Donald Trump. They're already not living in America. Anybody that's an actual Marxist or communist probably doesn't want to live in the United States because it's a very right-wing country. So good news for the Donalds and everybody else. You really don't have a lot. What you do have is a lot of liberals and a lot of Frappuccino, self-appointed so-called Marxists, which aren't really Marxists. They're just liberals who believe in these crazy social justice. It's not even social justice because that whole thing has been maligned as well. It's more of symbolic bullshit that they tend to uphold things like hyper focusing on trans issues, hyper focusing on pronouns, hyper focusing on all this stuff that isn't really something that actual, anti-imperialist Marxists really focus on. They focus on economics. And this is exactly what we've been talking about because we've been to countries that are socialist in their mindset, in their policies, like Nicaragua, like Cuba, like Venezuela. They don't really focus on that sort of thing. They tend to be conservative socially. These are things that you wouldn't know if and then there's, of course, it's really easy to call Biden a Marxist, because it's funny to people who know that Biden is a neoliberal. I mean, he's just, he's closer to being a Republican than anything else, with just terrible neoliberal policies. And of course, this social crap that's taking over the Liberal Party. But that has nothing to do with Marxism. So by using this sort of commies are coming to get us thing, you have the new opening, of course, towards manufacturing consent towards a new conflict with China. Because again, as we've said it from the beginning, all of these people that are criticizing the liberal agenda against Russia are going to go right back and send all this money that they don't want to go to Ukraine to Taiwan, because they see China as this communist threat. But China is really more of an economic threat, not an ideological threat. It's an economic threat because we're not producing and we're not making alliances, and China is doing just that.
I just wonder how he's going to be able to do this and log people down that are coming from Latin America. He's going to find out what party they were previously in. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do to figure this one out.